This is Andi Purewal for Boxing Social in association with Betfred, and for the first time since I actually think AJ Ruiz in New York, I'm delighted to be joined by Stephen Espinoza. Stephen, how are you doing?
Phenomenal. It's great to be out in circulation again, right?
It's good to hear. Obviously, you're in good spirits. A big event come Sunday night. Some people may not call it boxing, some may. But your thoughts, Floyd Mayweather, one of the greatest of our generation, the biggest stars in boxing, versus what is essentially somebody who's a YouTuber or a social media star in Logan Paul. What are your thoughts on it?
Well, look, it's a surprise. I was surprised it came together. And I was skeptical from the start. I didn't think it would happen. But clearly, it's one of those things, sort of like Mayweather-McGregor, that Floyd threw out a crazy idea and wouldn't let go of it and just willed it into an existence. And, and here we are. And the reality is, for boxing fans, I think there's a good chunk of them that feel like if we can get Floyd back in the ring somehow, we're happy to see him in the ring again. And there's certainly some who say, look, this is not my cup of tea. But the reality is, we're not presenting this as high-level championship boxing. This is a spectacle. It's an event. I don't know exactly what to expect. I know we've got a guy who's 50 pounds heavier and about 6 inches taller, about 20 years younger almost. And, there's some risk in here. There is some risk. Now, is a lot of risk? I guess we'll see Sunday night. But I'll tell you this, it's not going to be boring. It'll be memorable, that's for sure.
What was your thoughts when kind of the rules were put to Showtime about there being, I think it's down to 10-ounce gloves now. Originally it was meant to be 12. It's eight rounds. There's no scoring, so there's no official winner. What were your thoughts when all of that started to come together?
Well, I was actually impressed by the seriousness. I mean, a lot of these sort of quote-unquote celebrity or influencer fights are doing 2-minute rounds, so they're doing 4 or 6 rounds. But 8 rounds at 3 minutes, people don't realize, like, for normal people, for non-elite athletes, that's a real challenge. So I think that is, kudos to Logan agreeing for that, because he could have certainly insisted on 2 minutes, and he didn't. And those are going to be a long 3 minutes in each round.
What should people expect from the fight come Sunday then, Stephen? And also, with it being on a Sunday, what was the decision behind that?
Well, the Sunday, it really came down to the fact that this came together all very suddenly. And, it was a full calendar. The great thing is there's a backlog of a lot of boxing, and it's all rolling out, and we're getting a bunch of fights that maybe we didn't even think we would get. And it was Floyd's idea. He said, look, we're very much trapped in this Saturday mindset. He said, why not Sunday? There are big sporting events on Sunday. And, it was more open on Sunday than it was on Saturday with all the other things going on. So it was his call. And quite honestly, if it works, I think this actually could lead to more events on Sunday. That wasn't something strange 20, 30 years ago. We saw it a lot even on weeknights. And I think there will be a lot of so-called traditional boxing that is looking at this and saying, hey, maybe we'll open up another night of the weekend.
Originally, on the Saturday, Teofimo Lopez was looking to face George Kambosos. That has been pushed back a couple of weeks now. When you was putting this deal together, when the Mayweather-Paul deal was coming together, were you guys looking at that and assuming that fight was going to go ahead? Would you have been happy to have them on the 5th and you guys on the 6th, or would you obviously rather had 2 separate weekends?
Look, what we didn't want to do was go on top of that event. So that was part of it. Is I think both events could have coexisted on the same weekend. Look, it would have been tough. Tough getting a lot of attention if this big spectacle is the night after. So I don't blame them for moving. But the idea was not to sort of scare them off the weekend. It was, in fact, we were trying not to go head to head with them, but understandably so. But I think it'll be an interesting experiment for Sunday.
Stephen, just to go back to a question of couple questions ago, because we kind of got sidetracked. This fight on Sunday, what should people expect from Floyd and from Logan?
Well, look, Logan's been hard at work. This is not somebody who said, I'm sure you've seen him, I've seen him, these blue-collar boxing, white-collar boxing, smokers, you can tell when it's somebody who's done 8 or 10 weeks of training. You know, that's not Logan. He's clearly an athlete. He's clearly put his heart and soul into this. He's had a training camp. He has basic skills. And, you know, look, he's got some powerful weapons. I mean, he's got a great, really quick left hand. You know, I don't know if Floyd's worried about it, but I looked at it and I thought that's a pretty good strength. So he's got some tools to work with. This isn't just a guy out the street who started training 6 weeks ago. He's had a professional trainer. And, you know, this is the opportunity of a lifetime. I mean, the great irony would be, look, after 50 fights, how strange would it be if this was the one that actually got the first defeat?
Also signed Jake Paul, Logan's brother, to a deal with Showtime. Talk to me about that and how that came about and the actual plan with Jake beyond Tyron Woodley.
Yeah, you know, I think people were assuming, just because of the timing, that it was all part of a grand plan. It was actually 2 parallel tracks. And maybe Jake had it all planned out because he had the hat and everything was going to collide in one big event. But for us, it was 2 different things. I mean, Floyd brought us this event, you know, and due to our relationship with him, of course, we'd be involved. And then, you know, we got a call from Jake's manager, Nikisa, and started that conversation. And really the question there in terms of working with someone long-term as opposed to a one-off is, what are their ambitions? What are their intentions for this endeavor? So there were a lot of conversations, and I got to tell you, I came away impressed with Jake Paul. You know, he wants to make a go of this. This isn't 2 or 3 fights. This is, you know, let's do this for real and try to build a career and maybe even legacy in the sport. And, you know, the other thing is, you know, we wouldn't have gotten involved if this wasn't respectful and serious about the sport. You know, if you're going to go in there, clown around, take people's money, not take it seriously, and not respect the sport, then we never would have gotten involved. But I think you can see, you've spoken to Jake, you know, he respects the sport, he respects the history, he knows the history. You know, we've had long conversations about Showtime fights that he's watched, and you know, he believes that he has a career in boxing. He's doing a lot of great sparring in the gym, and I think the third biggest thing that made us go into business with him is he's clearly intent on elevating his level of competition and his level of risk, you know, noticeably each fight. So that's really all you can ask for from a fighter. And there's a lot of fighters, not mentioning names, who, you know, aren't progressively advancing their careers. But for him to sort of be advancing, we've seen where he's come from fighting YouTubers to other athletes to other combat sports athletes, and I think each time, I don't think it'll be very long before he's fighting a boxer.
That was going to be my next question. It's one thing which I think a lot of people are kind of keen to see now with regards to Jake's own development. And he's right what you're saying. When I've spoken to Jake as well, he has seemed very kind of knowledgeable on the sport and he wants to take it seriously. But when will the time come when he steps into the ring with an actual professional boxer?
I don't think it'll be very long. I think it was up to Jake. It might be the next fight or two. He's got a team advising him, and of course, you know, this is his amateur career. You know, that's the thing. He hasn't had an amateur career, so you know, we've seen, you know, Deontay Wilder's another one. You know, he had a very extended young pro career, and that was essentially his amateur career. I think this is a similar path that Jake is taking, but he just happens to have a huge built-in audience, you know, even before he put the gloves on. So I think what's interesting is part of Jake's message, which, you know, he's probably said to you, is if there's one thing he wants to bring to the sport beyond great events and a lot of excitement and maybe new fans, it's the mindset that, you know, that fighters have their careers in their own hands, that it's up to them to promote themselves. It's not up to a promoter. It's not up to a network. We live in a world now where you can make your own path, you know, very simply. And, you know, he's done it, and he's done it in, you know, he and Logan have both done it to tremendous success. So I think maybe that's the one lesson. If anything else, you know, he's looking at a lot of boxers and admiring what they do. I think there are boxers who are looking at what he's done on the social media side and are trying to take away some lessons from there.
So there's one professional boxer I want to get your thoughts on, and that's Tommy Fury. Obviously, Tommy and Jake have had their back and forths. Tommy, he's his own social media star because of his previous exploits on television in the UK. And he's also obviously the brother to Tyson Fury, the WBC and Ring Magazine heavyweight champion. Do you think that's a fight which could happen between Tommy and Jake? Both of them have spoke about it. Jake maybe playing it down a little bit, thinking that there's other avenues for himself to go down. But is it a fight you think could happen?
I think so. I mean, there's obviously a rivalry there, and there's obviously Tommy brings some value to the table. I mean, if we look at each of Jake's fights, he's taken an opponent that provides an athletic challenge, but also brings an audience of his own. So the same could be said of Tommy Fury. I mean, the Fury name certainly resonates with boxing and combat sport fans around the world. So I think there are a lot of interesting signs that there are elements in place that make Tommy an interesting opponent.
I mean, obviously, just to touch on Tyron Woodley, what should people expect from him in comparison to Jake's previous endeavours in the ring? What should people expect from him and from this fight in August?
Well, no disrespect to Ben Askren, but Tyron Woodley is a different caliber fighter. You can talk about striker or not striker or this and that. He has been an elite fighter, for his entire professional career, going back to 10 years ago with Strikeforce. And he has been a professional fighter since literally his childhood. So, whether it's boxing or an MMA, and there are certainly differences, but that is a different risk, fighting someone of the caliber of a Tyron Woodley in terms of athleticism, in terms of training and sort of mindset. It's a real challenge. And I can't tell you who wins. This is truly a 50-50 fight. And anybody who tells you otherwise, I think is lying to you. I don't know how you would predict the outcome of this fight.
Right, Stephen, moving forwards, I want to touch on the Showtime schedule of ones which are coming up. Starting off with the Charlo Montiel fight. Talk to me about that one. I think a few fans are disappointed a little bit that Jamal hasn't stepped up, not necessarily stepped up, but hasn't had a unification fight so far. Why Montiel?
Yeah, look, I think Jamal has been frustrated as well. We've had a couple deals in place for him to do things. Certainly a couple offers to Andre, and there's been lots of conversations. But the reality is, there's not, no one's rushing to fight Jamal Charlo, and it has nothing to do with other than the fact that he's a really, really skilled and talented fighter, along with his physical gifts. Juan Montiel doesn't have the same recognition, but you look at him, he's got 22 wins. They've all been by knockout, and he comes from a fighting family. I mean, he's not just any Montiel. He's the Fernando Montiels, the Montiels of Los Mochis, Mexico. So I feel like he's a little bit of a sleeper. I mean, he definitely hasn't had the level of competition of a Charlo, but he certainly has the pedigree from the family background, and he's been around boxing his whole life.
How much do you think, I know money is obviously a big thing in boxing, what would be the type of ballpark an offer would have to come in at to get a unification fight with one of the other champions, with an Andrade, with a Golovkin, with a Murata?
Look, I really don't think it's money, and I don't think it's networks. I think networks and network conflicts are usually a pretty easy, an easy excuse for people who don't want to make the fight. So I tend to think, look, when fights need to happen, they can happen. And so I think, there's money to be made. I mean, everyone was saying, oh, look, that Crawford versus Pacquiao couldn't happen because there was, no crowds or no money. And then all of a sudden, Spence Pacquiao happens out of the blue. It's not any cheaper to have Spence fight Pacquiao than it is Crawford. So you look at that and it was like, okay, how was one side able to figure out the money and when the other side wasn't? It's because money isn't really the issue. The issue is really, whether that's the fight that wants to be made either by the fighter or the promoter or both. So I think, the reason, I think more than anything, that Jamal hasn't gotten a unification fight and really hadn't had that career-defining fight until Derevyanchenko is that no one wants to fight him. There's not an upside in fighting Jamal Charlo, especially now that he's matured and is really at the peak of his career.
Moving forwards once again, the Mario Barros and Gervonta Davis fight. Gervonta Davis, I know this fight's at super lightweight, but he's certainly still having his name mentioned with those lightweights, with Teofimo Lopez, Ryan Garcia, Vasyl Lomachenko's still there, Devin Haney, who recently fought. But with this fight with Barros, why 140 for Tank?
I think it was really mostly a desire to do an exciting event and to surprise people. Went down the road, there were some conversations with Ryan Garcia. It didn't work out. And he looked around, and really, Mario Barros had gotten Tank's eye when he was on the undercard of the last pay-per-view of the Santa Cruz fight. And it was Tank who came up with the crazy idea. I don't think he's going to stay at 140. I don't think his career is at 140. But the opportunity was there. It was probably the most interesting available opponent that made sense. So he's going to take a risk, and it's a big risk, because my assumption after that last fight, after Barrios beat Ryan Carl in October, was that Barrios was going to 147. And so he's not a small 140-pounder. He's sort of bursting at the seams. So, this also is a very risky choice. I mean, there are much easier fights to be taken than to fight somebody who is arguably 2 and maybe 3 weight classes above you.
That lightweight division, as I mentioned, a lot of people would love to see everybody start to mix it. I know you've got the Teofimo Lopez fight on June 19th, but away from that, Devin's just fought, so he'll be looking for his next date. Ryan Garcia's coming back into boxing now after some time off with his own issues. Do you think it's likely we will see Tank versus one of those in the near future?
I certainly hope so. Look, the fight didn't work out, but I have no doubt that Ryan Garcia actually wants the fight. If you ask for odds on that one, I would say, when both fighters sincerely want the fight, those are the fights that typically happen, sooner rather than later. So I think it's very realistic. Yes, there are details that need to be worked out and arrangements and all that. But when you have 2 fighters who really want to fight, typically everything else eventually gets resolved.
Gamboa Colbert, again, just your thoughts behind that fight. A lot of people seem to be thinking that Yuriorkis Gamboa's, I don't want to say past it, but sure, he's certainly not the fighter he once was. Moving forwards with him, what was the planning behind that fight?
Yeah, well, I think, Chris Colbert, you've got to remember, is still relatively young. And I think that the upside in Gamboa is really having that veteran experience. And this is, one that, the public may not love it, but I think it's a really necessary fight in the development of a fighter's career. I mean, because of his style, because of his pedigree, he went 12 rounds with Tank on an injured Achilles. He's a tough fighter, and he can surprise you at any time. And Chris Colbert, as impressive as he's been the last couple fights, is still relatively new on the scene. So I think this is the right fight at the right time. Maybe not the biggest fight in terms of the fans' eyes, but I think it is the right fight because it is the right fight for his development of his skills.
Now, I know we won't get a chance to work through all of the schedule because you're a busy man. I've just been told you've got some stuff to do, but just a couple more to touch on and a couple away from the schedule. Charlo Castano, brilliant fight, undisputed bout at 154. How easy was it to put together, and what should fans expect from it?
See, that's another one. Castano was all for it, so that one was, no problem putting it together. And I think this is one where I think Castano is a bit of a sleeper to most people. He has a tough style. He's a stocky guy who fights inside, and that's a style that could give Jermell some trouble. If Jermell wins, I don't think he'll get enough credit for it. I'm saying it now because Castano is not a household name, but he is a tough, rugged fighter. And I don't think that is a gimme by anything. So I think if there's one, it sounds strange. I think people are sort of penciling in Jermell as undisputed champion. This is a tough fight. This is tougher than people think.
Rigondo Casemero coming up as well, and also just your thoughts, not just on that fight, but Nonito Donaire rolling back the years once again, becoming a world champion. He said openly he'd love to face the winner of that bout. Firstly, your thoughts on Rigondo Casemiro, and secondly, would you be happy to try and make that Donaire versus the winner? Well,
we've seen, Rigondo, we've seen him in some exciting fights, and typically where you have somebody who's super aggressive, we saw it in, Jarrett Hurd, who's obviously on the card Sunday, versus, Andi Lara. If you've got an aggressive fighter and sort of a defensive guy, usually that's going to turn out to be a much better fight. That's what you have with Casemero Rigondeaux, a really slick defensive fighter in Rigondeaux. But Casemero, and it's a cliche, anyone who comes along in the smaller weight classes and who's, Filipino, you mentioned Manny Pacquiao. But you look at Casemero, and I actually think the comparison fits. Athletically, quickness, speed, the sort of unpredictability, and he's just a lot of fun to watch. So I think that's a great style matchup, and I think there's no way that fight isn't a great one.
Now, as we briefly spoke about off camera, Stephen, the UK fans certainly, they took to the boxing schedule announced by you guys over the pandemic, the schedules you have announced. What will be the plans for the UK fans to be able to try to tune in? Have you guys looked at maybe looking to get into that market?
Yeah, I'm hopeful. Maybe in the long run, I don't think it's imminent, but maybe there's a digital solution because look, there are different broadcasters. Obviously, in the UK, they each have their own agenda. They have their own budgets. They have their own schedules, and it doesn't always work as much as the boxing fans would like it for a network to pick up a fight at 3 a.m. and spend some money on it. So, the solution may be a digital one. It may be, ultimately making these available direct to consumer. I think in the long run, that's the way to go. Not that I'm trying to put the UK networks out of business whatsoever, but I think for the hardcore fans, they don't just want occasional fights. They want any fight. So I'd love to find a solution to that.
The Deontay Wilder arbitration win, meaning that he will rematch Tyson Fury once again. Just wanted to get your thoughts on that and the entire situation, which now means we won't see an AJ Fury undisputed bout. We'll see the Wilder Fury free fight. Just your take on watching those events unfold.
I think there was, a fair bit of arrogance and really irresponsibility in the whole thing. It seemed like, the Fury and Joshua teams just completely ignored the fact that there was this legal case down there. They went ahead and went down this long road of, pseudo announcements every 2 days about the fight. That also added to the whole thing. I mean, they knew this case was in the background. They knew there's some degree of risk. They seemed to ignore it, and then they went on and sort of, irritated all the fans by, announcing a deal to come every 48 hours. So it was the perfect storm of the perfect wrong way to handle a situation. So look, I don't blame Deontay at all. I think Deontay got the brunt of the criticism when it should have gone to the promoters. It's not Deontay's fault. The fighter is always going to want, a chance of revenge, and I give him all the credit in the world. He got beaten soundly in the second fight, and he spent 18 months trying to get a rematch immediately. He didn't do that to take a step-aside fee. He wants a rematch, to prove it wrong. So I think he deserves credit. He spent money on legal fees and, kept fighting, and he got the rematch. Now it's up to him to change the storyline.
Final one, Pacquiao Spence, a brilliant fight everybody's looking forward to. Just your take again on seeing that one unfold so quickly?
Yeah, it's sort of a study in contrast there, and personally, I've always subscribed to the theory that the more you hear about a deal in the press, the less negotiating is actually going on and the less likely a deal is going to be made. And I think Fury Joshua and Spence Pacquiao are perfect examples. Nobody heard anything about Spence Pacquiao until it was announced. And, as opposed to Fury Joshua, when we got minute-by-minute updates, even when we didn't want them. So I think, look, there's probably a fair middle ground that also works as well. But I think the sport would be better off if there'd be, less sort of hyperbole, less sort of aggrandizement, and people put the head down and do the work. We didn't talk about setting forth a 5-month schedule. We just went out and did it. We didn't promise and say for 6 months teasing what we're going to do. If you want to make great fights, go out and make them and then announce them.
All right, Stephen, we'll leave it there now because I know you're a busy man. You've got stuff to do, so I appreciate your time today. Enjoy the rest of this week and, of course, the coming schedule and what's left of it until the next announcement. Thank you for speaking to Boxing Social.
Absolutely. Great to see you guys again.